Hey folks, Eddie from Totally Wired Guitars here, and I'm super excited because today I'm going to be sharing with you all how I turned this first year Squier Vintage Modified Jaguar into my very own Johnny Marr Signature Special Jaguar, and all for under $650. So without further ado, let's get into it. So pretty much ever since my heart shattered after having to send back the loaner unit that Zounds had so graciously sent to me for me to be able to do the deep dive review on that guitar back in the fall of 2025, I'd been thinking about ways I could potentially make my very own Johnny Marr Signature Special Jaguar, but also on a budget. And I took the most inspiration, honestly, from the video that my friend and fellow offset guitar enthusiast and YouTuber Mark B had released prior to the release of the Johnny Marr Signature Special Jaguar. And the one that he had featured in that video had been put together by Jack and Mario over at Offset Guitars UK. So we started chatting, and he was nice enough to offer to send me a number of these upper circuit control plates that they had produced to create the Johnny Marr Jaguar Special clones, right? And on top of that, he also sent me a number of pick guards compatible with the Dan Electro size lipstick pickups. And he even kindly made me a routing template to replicate the routing that he and Mario did when they were creating the clone that they had built. And so I was off to the races after finding myself super dirt cheap vintage modified Squier. Now this one is dated 2011, so that's the first year of production. These actually didn't come out until 2012, but that is routine. Usually you see the production dates begin the year before the release. And this one was in not great condition, especially because there had been a hole drilled through the back here. And on top of that, there was already some dremeling or routing that had been done to the body of this. It seems like maybe he was trying to do a Johnny Marr mod of some type, because he had carved out or routed out partially the upper control route here. And the reason I say that is because it almost fit perfectly once I tried to line up this control plate with the switches loaded on. On top of that, the other reason why I got it cheap, along with a bunch of other parts that I got from him, was because there was a crack, a very small hairline crack that was going through the headstock here. And so the very first thing that I did, because I knew that I was not going to be keeping any of the electronics, I was not going to be keeping the tuners. So basically I just sold all of the hardware and electronics that had come from the guitar, and I ended up netting just about $100. So my total cost for the husk of this build was only $100. That was a very good start. Now, as the old saying goes, hindsight is 20/20, and if I were to redo this build, there'd be definitely a number of things that I would do differently, because this honestly ended up being quite a nightmare to work on, primarily because of the selection of pickups that I chose, as well as trying to do as minimal of a routing job as possible here, because the routing template that Jack had provided to me is basically just adding a third pickup in the middle. The size of the routes themselves are pretty much unchanged, and if we take a look and compare against the body and routes of an actual authentic Johnny Marr Signature Special Jaguar, you'll see that there is a number of differences between that and what you would find on a Squier or even a traditional Fender Jaguar. So one of the first things that you'll notice if we take a look at a picture of the authentic version is that the routes there, instead of being small and almost perfectly sized for just the Jaguar pickups, they have these bigger squared off routes to accommodate the Kent Armstrong lipsticks that they were putting in there. And then on top of that, there's no separation between the neck pickup route and the upper control route, so that you would be able to fit the third switch, or the middle pickup switch. And so in an attempt to basically just route for a third pickup, but also only route the existing pickup cavities just a bit deeper, I ended up running into an issue where a Danelectro size lipstick pickup with a flat base plate like they used on the authentic Johnny Marr Signature Special, unfortunately would not fit inside of my newly routed Jaguar body. There just was not enough space up here on the base side of the bridge for this thing to fit without, potentially cutting this down even further. So with this version of the Danelectro pickup now out of the question, I decided to follow Jack's lead, and he had recommended that I go for the Artec made Danelectro style pickups. And these are the kind that come with that raised bracket, and this would prove to be the biggest headache of this build. Now, while those pickups did fit, they definitely required that the routes here end up being a lot deeper than I was originally intending to do. And then on top of that, those brackets are mounted or affixed to the lipstick pickup in such a way that you quite literally almost cannot even access the screws by which to mount them. Now, I have done a lot of routing and stuff before, but for some reason, when I was routing out the middle pickup here, the lock on my plunge router came undone, and so it lifted the routing bit just enough to unfortunately eat into my template here, which kind of frazzled me. At that point, it probably would have been smart for me to just stop, take a breather, but instead I decided to push through, and that is when mistakes end up having kind of a domino effect when you kind of try to push through rather than be patient and come back at your projects with a cool head. So I finished the routing to the depths that I thought that Jack had told me, forgetting that he had mentioned that he had stepped the depths, with the shallowest depth being at the bridge pickup and the deepest being at the neck. I think I had routed the depth to an even 26 millimeters across, and when I tried to put in my bridge pickup here, I noticed that it was still a bit too shallow. The pickup was sitting a little bit too high, and I was thinking to myself, man, the one thing I don't want to replicate from the way that Jack at Offset Guitars UK had done it is that his pickups in the end were basically non-adjustable. So I wanted to put foams underneath these Danelectro pickups and then mount them with the screws and still have them be adjustable in that way. That would prove to be very, very challenging. So the next stupid move that I ended up doing in my impatience is, rather than wait to contact Jack, at this point in time, I believe it would probably have been like 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning where Offset Guitars UK is. And rather than wait and ask him what those depths were, I instead assumed that it would be okay for me to route to the same depth as the tremolo and control routes. Now, that left me, I believe, with a depth of, I think like something like 38 millimeters or so. And the body of this Jaguar here is only 42 millimeters. So, in case you don't know, 4 millimeters is shallower than even the size of the threaded portion of a pick guard screw. Now, another thing that I did after getting the routes to the depth that I did was just thinking about the annoyances that I have when wiring up Jaguars, particularly ones that do not have the channels routed out between the control cavities and the pickup cavities. And because I needed the space anyway to be able to fit this third switch up here, I decided to stray away from the template that Jack had provided to me and just route out that material there. I also routed out a channel between the neck pickup route and the control route for the blade switch, as well as between the overall kind of pickup route and the main control route. And that just made the wiring for this so much easier. I wasn't going to have to worry about lining wires through a tiny hole. Now from there, given the mistakes that I have made with the depths of these routes, I was going to have to figure out how in the world I was actually going to mount these pickups. And the first couple considerations that I gave were good ideas in theory, but in execution, because of the design of those vintage style Danelectro pickups, was really going to be a headache, especially as far as being able to adjust the pickup heights was concerned. The first limitation, as I said to you before, was that I was not going to be able to screw these pickups down to the body directly, not only because of the construction of the pickups, but because I only had about 4 to 5 millimeters left in thickness to the body, which is very, very thin, and even a pick guard screw would end up going through there. The next thing that I thought of was potentially shimming up the pickups, basically screwing them onto like a platform, in this case like stacked and glued popsicle sticks, which then I was going to like glue into the body. And while that idea would have worked, again, adjusting the pickups to taste would be very, very challenging, because getting to whatever kinds of screws that I would end up screwing these pickups to, if I put them on top of like a wooden platform, would be very, very hard to do, considering the fact that the lipstick itself, the lipstick tube, is in the way of those screws. I really had no option but to do this the old Danelectro way, which is to screw in and mount the pickups from the back. And yes, I know that you love my my master level design choice here. I did end up putting a sticker on the back here to cover up where those holes were, because they just kind of looked a bit weird to me prior to putting that on. I tried to color match the surf green here as best as possible before printing this thing out. And I think it looks nice and classy and kind of punk rock and pop art-ish here. But with the added benefit that now I can adjust the pickup heights so easily without all of the back and forth of having to capo up my neck and remove the tremolo and remove the bridge and remove the pickup every single time I needed to make a micro adjustment. And especially because of the fact that these Danelectro pickups are really, really testy. They are very, very particular about how they want to be set up. Just a millimeter too close or too far away from the strings is the difference between like an articulate and a muddy tone, or an articulate and a really harsh tone. So they are very, very sensitive to their settings. And so this honestly ended up being the best solution. And if you decide to do these mods and don't want to deal with the headaches that I've just outlined, then this solution here might also be the solution for you. I didn't have a more elegant way to do this, and nor did I have the patience. I really just wanted to get this thing built, but that's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. In the future, I still would like to replicate how the routing was done on the authentic Johnny Marr Signature Special, so that we could have a clean back to the guitar. Now, when it came to the wiring of this, it definitely is a lot more involved and messier of a job than doing the original Johnny Marr mod with just the 2 pickups, particularly because these lipstick pickups have a construction where you basically have 3 wires coming out of a black sleeve. You've got your hot, you've got your ground, and then you've got a bare wire that grounds the pickup cover and the base plate of the pickup itself. By that measure alone, it definitely makes the wiring a bit more complicated, in addition to the fact that we do have a 3rd switch here. And that 3rd switch, in case you didn't see or don't know how the Johnny Marr Signature Special works, this 3rd on off on switch, which is basically the same switches that they use on the Fender Mustang, controls just the middle pickup. And when you've got it all the way to the left towards the neck, that switch turns the middle pickup off, so it's not in any of the selections. Then if you put it in the middle, that combines the middle pickup with any of the pickup selections that you are controlling down here. And then if you switch it all the way to the right towards the bridge, that engages only the middle pickup. It definitely took me probably about 2 hours or so to get it finished. Thankfully, the Johnny Marr documentation that's out there in PDF form direct from Fender outlines exactly how this guitar is wired. And so everything, thankfully, on this was pretty much smooth sailing. And prior to doing that step, I did go ahead and shield the cavities of this body with copper foil shielding, as well as the back of the pickup, because like the Johnny Marr Signature Special, do not have a reverse wound, reverse polarity middle pickup here. So you're going to be getting some level of 60 cycle hum with all of the pickup combinations available here. Now, one additional thing that I did want to share that differs a bit from the Johnny Marr Signature Special Jaguar clone that Jack had built for Mark B is the fact that I followed the authentic model's version for the pot specs. And so we went with 250K pots for both the volume and tone, with a 0.01 UF capacitor here, along with that 56K resistor. Now, I think Johnny had gone with that spec over the traditional 1 meg pots found in a Jaguar, because I think 1 meg, you know, it would just be too bright. These pickups are already bright enough as is. I do find myself reaching for the tone pot quite a bit here, and I do find it usable in all positions here, because particularly with these Artec made pickups here, I would not necessarily call the upper end of the tone spectrum for these pickups that pleasant. They can verge a little bit on harsh. And so dialing that back even just a tad helps with the tone a bit. Now from there, I did have to do a fill and re-drill for the holes after routing out the control route, because it does have those wings on that 4-way switch that needed to be routed out. And unfortunately, these stock holes did not align with this new control plate here. And then also I was using a new control plate down here, because this one had the US spec to it, and matched the rest of the other plates, the chrome plates that I have here. And so this also needed to have these 2 holes up here filled and re-drilled for it to work. I did also use the longer spec screws that were compatible with all of these Switchcraft switches, so that I could do and replicate the Johnny Marr low profile mod, where I basically am using like metal spacers in between the switches themselves and the screws and the plate here, so that those switches can sit a lot lower profile and are a lot harder to accidentally engage when you are playing live. Now, with everything screwed in, I then went to go install the bridge, which is one of the Offset Guitars UK's 9.5-inch radius nickel-plated brass saddle offset bridges. Definitely, I've gone on record on this channel and on Instagram many times to say that this is my favorite rocking bridge option out there, and one that I use the most over the past year and some change now. I just love it because it's got that classic design, and it reminds me a lot of the Stay Trem in that it does have those offset saddle screws, so that when you're intonating, your strings aren't in the way. But then it even goes a bit further than Stay Trem in the fact that it does have these channels built into both the back and the front of the bridge, which make the bridge reversible, so that you can rock it with those screws either in the back like they do traditionally or towards the front, depending on how you want it to be set. And no longer are you going to run into the issue of your strings, if you have a steep break angle behind the bridge, of your strings potentially catching the back edge of the bridge base. Now, prior to installing this bridge, I did do the mod that I typically do with these offset bridges, which is to put some surgical tubing on the legs of these, and then with the surgical tubing on, when placed in the stock thimbles, which are basically like vintage spec, at least as far as the inner bore of these thimbles are concerned, it keeps the bridge perfectly center, but when you need to use the vibrato, it still has enough kind of play because of the squishy material of that surgical tubing. It still is able to rock, but always comes back to perfect center once you let go of the vibrato. So it handles that very, very common issue of bridges kind of straying or leaning forward or backward in the thimbles very, very successfully. And shout outs to my friend Andy, who shared that trick that he had been doing on his offsets for years. And lastly, I had a couple of different options that I could go with for the vibrato, but I ended up going with the F2 tremolo from our friends at Foles. They did provide this to me at no cost for me to feature in my own personal build, so it ended up being this one. And if you've seen any of my reviews on either the Foles FJM7 Ultra or the Foles FJG7, I just really, really love this vibrato unit. It definitely borrows from other premium aftermarket units like your Mastery vibrato, your Panorama tremolo, and even your Descendant vibrato, in that all of those units do use a set screw to adjust the tightness of the vibrato arm here. I might still do the nylon disc mod so that this is just a little bit stiffer and doesn't come loose over time. And I shared that with you folks in the Foles FJG7 review that I released last week. But for now, I think it feels perfectly good. And I just think that this is a really nice responsive unit. As you can see, it's got a nice extra long arm that reaches basically almost the full way up the control plate here. It just feels really, really premium. It feels really fluid, and it returns back to tune perfectly if you set it up to float properly. Now, I did cover this also in the FJG7 video, and I didn't stupidly, because I was in a rush, didn't test out to see if indeed 11 gauge strings would solve the issue of you not being able to properly calibrate the lock. I'm gonna have to go back and try that out here, but I did end up replacing the spring and screw on this with that vintage pre-CBS Jazzmaster tremolo spring that I've kind of been like testing out on like all of these guitars that I've been working on and messing around with over the past 2 or 3 months or so. So with our pickups, our electronics, our control plates, and all of the rest of the hardware now mounted, I could move on to the neck. Again, because I got this guitar for a steal, the neck unfortunately needed a lot of work to get feeling right and playing right. I did unfortunately find that there was a number of high frets across the board. It did exhibit a bit of fret sprout too, which made the edge of the neck feel a bit uncomfortable. While these did have rosewood fretboards, prior to the launch of the Classic Vibe series, where they swapped these out for the Laurel fingerboards, it just didn't feel great. I like the profile of this a lot, but the edge of this neck just felt really kind of hard. The fretboard edges weren't really rolled. Also, I did have to address that crack that was in the headstock. It didn't have tuners, so I needed to install the bushings for those. So in an effort to make this thing play like $1,000,000, I was going to give this neck the works and make it feel as good as I possibly could. Starting off, obviously, with a fret leveling here. I did a customary fall away to kind of give a ramp or fall away to the last 5 frets here. It helps with not not buzzing in the upper registers, and just clearing, you know, your bends when you get higher up the neck, not getting any fret out and such. From there, I moved on to crowning the frets using my StewMac Z file, the original one that's kind of offset. And then the dressing to address those fret ends. And while I was dressing, I also did do the beveling of the fretboard edges, as well as rolling the fingerboard edge for a much more comfortable rounded feel to them. I feel like in the end here, you can see I ended up with a feeling that's not too dissimilar to the feel that the Player 2 models, which are very, very well known for having nice feeling necks, in large part due to the fact that they have those rolled fingerboard edges. And then after that, I ended up polishing the frets using Music Nomad's Tracers system. This is new to me. I usually just polish frets in the end using a bunch of different micro mesh pads, starting off with like 1500 and moving my way up to 12,000 grit. That nice mirror-like shine that it leaves me. I really dig it. I like it better than using like polishing wheels and whatnot. I really do like this system a lot. It's great. The one thing that I'm not a fan of is the cost for the refills for the little emery cloth sleeves that this thing comes with, because they basically are almost as expensive as the system itself. I think this is like $39.99 and the refills are like almost 30 bucks, which makes no sense. I feel like once I wear through the emery cloth sleeves here, I'm just going to buy more emery cloth and probably just keep them on the little handle here using a rubber band. Now, in my excitement and rush to finish this, because I just wanted to play it already, I was partially through installing the bushings when I remembered that there was a crack in this headstock. So I did need to apply some CA glue and clamp the headstock down and leave it there for a bit. I decided not to use accelerator, especially for a job like this where the crack went through the front to the back of the headstock. The accelerator was not going to be the ticket home here, so we just needed to let it sit. I let it sit, I believe, for about an hour. I ended up taking a much needed break and then came back, cleaned things off with a razor blade, and you know, use my micro mesh pads to polish it the best that I could. If we come up on it here, I feel you can definitely still see it a bit. It's up there by between the D and G tuning posts, right? But for the most part, it's not a big deal. And again, structurally very sound after all the work that was done to it. So the rest of the tuner bushings went in, installed these tuners. I got these tuners from one of the MIJ traditional 60s offsets. They're not the best tuners, definitely not as good as Goto's, but definitely better than your standard set of classic vibe tuners or Squier tuners. Definitely better than the tuners that came on this thing stock. So I ended up installing those. And the last thing was to just clean off and oil the fretboard. And then after getting these strings installed, I then did some slotting to the nut, because unfortunately the stock nut here, while fairly decent, and I did appreciate the fact that it didn't feel sharp or super high when my hand would glide up here, these slots were just a tiny bit too shallow. And so I decided at that point that I wasn't going to swap out the nut right away. Yes, it is synthetic bone or just a synthetic material. I'm not sure. It cut in a way that's very similar to tusk. I don't exactly know what this material on the Vintage Modifieds is made of, but it was good enough. And actually, the Johnny Marr Signature Special does not feature a bone nut either. It features a melamine nut. So I decided to keep this stock. I might still switch this off to bone in the future, but for now, I'm happy with how it plays. All right, so enough gabbing. I'm sure you all want to hear what this thing sounds like. So let's go ahead, plug it into the Princeton Reverb reissue, give it a bit of a playthrough, and then afterwards I'm going to share with you my overall thoughts on the sound and feel of the guitar, how closely it comes to the authentic Johnny Marr Signature Special Jaguar, the cost of all of the parts that ended up going into this build, and whether or not I think doing this kind of mod is actually worth doing. And so let's go ahead and plug this thing in and see what it sounds like. All right, we are now on series. We are going to start off clean and then kick on the Electro Harmonics Triangle Big Muff reissue. We have kicked the Dream Gazer back on as we switch over to the middle pickup by itself. We are now on the shallower setting on the Dream Gazer, and then we are going to kick on the Klon in the middle of it. And lastly, we are switching over now to the bridge and middle together with the strangle switch on. And we've also got the clon on, but the gain is down right about 7 o'clock, and the volume and tone are both at noon. All right, so there it is, my homemade Johnny Marr Signature Special Jaguar. Now, these Artec pickups are all right. To be honest with you, I definitely still think that the Kent Armstrong special design lipsticks that are in the original Johnny Marr Jaguar special sound like noticeably better than these. I'm not super familiar with the lipstick sound in general. I have owned some Dan Electros over the years, but not long enough for that tone, the iconic Dan Electro tone, to really register in my mind. I'm curious to hear in the future if I can find some actual vintage Dan Electro pickups, or find a set from Neptone, who supposedly makes the most authentic recreations, or maybe pick up a set from the one and the only Curtis Novak, who I hear also makes authentic recreations using actual Alnico 6 magnets, which even the Johnny Marr Signature Special does not use. I believe those are still just Alnico 5 magnets. I'm curious to hear what more premium pickups sound like. Now, the thing that I do like about these Dan Electro LP1 pickups from All Parts, made by Artec, I believe, is the fact that they are like about 7.5K in output. That does give us a bit more mids than the traditional, vintage spec Dan Electro pickup. It has a bit more presence there as well. And so it does cut through, I feel like, a mix a bit better than the super scooped out tone that we are getting from the neck pickup here, which is one of the Dan Electro LP2 pickups, also from All Parts. This one has an output of about 4.5K and is noticeably, how should I say this? I feel like it was really hard to dial in a neck pickup tone that I really liked with this pickup. I think what you heard there is the best that I ended up managing. I do kind of wish it wasn't as kind of dull sounding overall, particularly because the neck pickup is usually my favorite. I feel like it does sound strongest when it is in the series position in combination with the bridge pickup, and also when the strangle switch is engaged, because it cuts out some of that mud that we're getting. Again, challenging to dial this in because too high and it becomes really, really boomy and kind of just murky sounding, but then you adjust just a little bit too low and then it starts to lack definition, particularly in the bass end. It didn't seem to really make that much of a difference how much higher I would set the treble side on this neck pickup, because again, it's just very, very weak. And I think one of the upsides to that is that when we are putting both the bridge and the neck pickup now in series, and even in combination with that middle pickup, it's not overly hot. I feel like if both of these pickups were in that 7.5K range, undoubtedly that would just end up sounding a bit too hot for me. But yeah, overall, though, I really do dig the tone, and I can understand from the interviews that Johnny has done talking about this as a more of a streamlined, kind of rock-oriented Jaguar, that I was definitely getting that, especially when we were engaging the clone, when we were engaging the tube screamer, and just getting a bit more of that fierce kind of rock and roll sound from having those pedals and also the amp cooking a bit more. Definitely very different from the traditional Jaguar tone. Now, as far as the feel of the guitar goes, my goodness, it definitely feels like a premium bit of kit here, especially after all of the work that was done to this neck. I love the fact that there really is no compromises with this neck. We do have the rosewood here. As you can see, it is nice and dark and kind of even throughout. So I love that. I really wish Squier would bring back the rosewood. It's a high quality neck. There was no issues remaining from that crack we ended up filling on the headstock. And I just love the feel and profile of these Squier Vintage Modified necks. It definitely is a bit different than the classic vibes, in that this one, when I measured with my calipers, ended up having a neck thickness up at the first fret here of 0.85 inches, which is a bit thicker, but you move up to the 12th fret and it's only 0.88, and it feels very, very similar to the vintage 1966 Mustang neck that's on the Belinda Stang that I had built. And I just love that almost no taper feel to this, not overly chunky at the first fret, very on point for the Johnny Marr signature Jaguars, which are usually around that, you know, anywhere between 0.83 and 0.85 at the first fret. But I do love that it's still nice and slim at the 12th, something that I have been missing from a lot of the Jaguar necks that have been coming out over the past couple of years. In particular, the Vintera 3 Jaguar neck is definitely a return to the chunkier neck, and the classic vibe Jaguar necks are definitely still a bit thicker than this at the 12th fret. And so in a lot of ways, this very much does remind me of some of those old school Fender Japan necks, which I really, really love. The other thing that I really love about this Jaguar, which is not common to find, is the fact that this fully built with all of these parts installed is only 7.5 pounds. That is really nothing short of a miracle. A lot of these vintage modifieds and even classic vibe Jaguars can still be quite heavy, despite the fact that basswood and poplar should technically be a bit lighter than most of the alder bodies that you will find out there. But I have found, unfortunately, the opposite case with a lot of the ones that have been here in the shop and on my bench. So that was a pleasant surprise, and I do not think that it comes down to just the fact that we hogged out a bunch of wood. Again, we didn't end up doing a swimming pool route here, and I did end up taking these down to whatever that figure was, 36 or 38 millimeters. So yeah, some wood has come out, but I really think we ended up saving on weight from the fact that these Dan Electro pickups are quite lightweight, definitely lighter weight than a Jaguar pickup. Also, replacing a full rhythm circuit assembly with just 3 switches lightens up a bit of the weight. I'm not sure how much of a weight savings we ended up getting from replacing the 3 independent switches with a blade switch here. But overall, this combination of hardware that we went with here definitely helped result in this overall lighter weight guitar. Again, I don't remember it being this light when it was still just a vintage modified Jaguar. I could have sworn it was still in the 8-pound range at that point. But yeah, a pleasant surprise nonetheless. Now, I shared from the top that this build ended up being under $650. I ended up getting the vintage modified Jaguar with the issues that it had for about $250. I sold off all of the stock guts and parts for $100. So my total cost for the husk was $150. Again, I ended up getting these at a dealer discount from all parts. So the pickups ended up being $57 total. The Offset Guitars UK bridge was $120. The Offset Guitars UK upper control plate was $47. Now, Jack did provide this pick guard to me. We have a very, very limited amount of these, but we're going to be selling these for $50 each for the pick guard. And so then we've got the Foles F2 Tremolo. Again, they sent this to me for review, but if you were to buy one, I did factor it into the cost, and the Foles F2 is $75. Now for the blade switch plate and the lower control plate, I ended up using the ones that you can find on Amazon by the brand Kaish. The blade switch plate was $10, and the lower bout control plate was $13. For the 250K pots, I got them from StewMac along with a bunch of other stuff that I ordered from them. So these came in at about $4 a piece. The 4-way blade switch here is a Fender brand that was $20 on Amazon. The chrome switch tip here was about $5. Now for our switches, I got all of these from Tone Shapers. The on-off-on switch, or the Mustang switch, was about $8, and each one of the Jaguar switches here was $5 each, so $10. The input jack was about $4. The Jaguar knobs here, which are the authentic Fender Jaguar knobs, were $12 on Amazon. I'm not sure what the stock MIJ tuners would cost, but I just gave them a figure that's a bit cheaper, since they're cheaper feeling than the Gotos, which usually run about 40, 45 bucks. So I just gave these a value of about 25 bucks for the tuners. I would say that, yeah, we did use a vintage paper and oil 0.01 UF capacitor down here, and I bought those as part of a huge lot. So in total, I'd say all of the capacitors, that 0.01 UF vintage paper and oil, plus both of the 0.003 like ceramic disc capacitors, along with the resistor, I just gave it an overall value of about $10. As far as how much we used for the Gavit cloth covered wiring, I probably ended up using less than this amount, but I gave it a value of about $10. And then as far as the cost for the shielding tape used here, that was probably like $5 worth or less. So my final build cost at the end was $639. Now again, there are a couple things that are unique to this, so you might have to add some money. If you go for like a used classic vibe Jaguar, those are going used for around $300 all day, every day. So if you are not going to be keeping any of that stuff, any of the parts that come stock with that guitar, you most definitely will be able to make at least $100 off of all of those parts, which you can then apply towards the other things that went into this kind of build. So if you are starting with a $300 or $350 Squier Classic vibe, then expect to add like $50 or $100 still to the end cost. Obviously, the more you know how to do yourself, especially when it comes to like fit and finish work, fret work, nut work, and all of that, the cheaper this is going to be. But if you have to pay a tech to do that kind of stuff, because the stock neck that you got on your Squier, or whatever neck you want to pop onto this build, ends up having some issues that need to be addressed, then you're also going to have to factor that into the cost. Now, was it worth it to do this? I think honestly, this is a Squier. I'm not going to pretend that this feels every bit as good or better than the actual authentic Johnny Marr Signature Special Jaguar, but it does get somewhat close, especially as far as the vibe of the Johnny Marr Jaguar Special goes. I do like the uniqueness of the lipstick pickup arrangement. It just sounds really, really sweet and unique for a Jaguar. Again, with the work that was done to this neck, it does feel a lot more premium. To me, it feels like on par now with a well worked on Japanese neck, in my opinion. And yeah, I just really, really love this guitar. And because of the issues that this had, I don't think I'm going to be flipping this or trying to sell this. In closing, it was definitely a fun project. I ended up learning a lot. There are mistakes that were made here that I will not be repeating should I do this kind of mod again. And I do have more of these pick guards, more of these control plates. So if you are in the New York City area and want to mod your Squier to do this same thing, or whatever guitar you have, to be modded to these same kind of specs, definitely hit me up because I have the parts to do it. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with this thing and really love overall how this turned out. Anyway, that is going to do it for this video. I hope you found it enjoyable, informative, as well as inspiring, especially if you've been thinking about doing the Johnny Marr Signature Special mods on your Jag. Let me know down in the comments if you've already done these mods and what you ended up running into and any tips and tricks you might have. I know I and others who are interested in potentially doing these mods would greatly appreciate it. Another big shout out again to Jack, Mario, and the team at Offset Guitars UK for sending me all of the things that was required to make this build a reality. And also thank you to the kind folks at Foles for sending this tremolo unit over for demo purposes. If you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell to be notified of new videos as soon as they drop. And don't forget to follow Totally Wired Guitars for more offset guitars modding tips.